What's your best true spooky story? Serious. While at university, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late on, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in, was just row after row of suburban houses, which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. People were playing musical instruments, and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire, and the lanterns which were dotted about, gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there. Not just no people or horses, there was no field, just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. The scariest thing I've had to happen while camping. So, I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer, and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We ended up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. Then, a truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. I don't know what about, I wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake up easily, so I heard her gasp, and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what was wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden, we heard footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there, just us girls like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and then a river but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under my topper next to all of my gear instead of setting up my tent. The next morning, I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I noticed that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long ratty beard and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast, nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer. But he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me, wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum: you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately. He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away, and I threw my things in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over to my boyfriend, trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed, and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in, and there is a warmth in your back? I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over, my boyfriend wasn't in bed, and I felt the bed release pressure. Whatever was lying next to me had gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs to their house because it's always cold, and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life, I have had scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. It's not as spooky as some other stories on here, I guess, but my partner and I are still a bit bewildered by it. It's been years, and we still wonder about it occasionally. There's no explanation other than some weird supernatural connection or just a really big coincidence. For about 10 years now, my Nana has been living in a nursing home. She had a stroke, and mentally she is not all there. She still recognizes us when we visit and gets happy to see us, but she often talks gibberish, thinking she is in a distant memory of the past. It makes me sad because she and I always had a very close connection growing up. My parents both worked a lot, and she would stay with me. She used to know when I was lying, she could always sense when I was sick, even when she wasn't over, and she and I are eerily similar in personality and looks. There are pictures of her when she was 21, and it could be me in the picture. We were very close growing up, and I love her dearly. I introduced her to my now husband when we started dating in college. He is from a different country than I am, and I live in his country, so we had been dating a few years when my visa was going to expire. In order for us to live in one place, we decided to get married. However, we were still young, fresh out of university, and decided to just elope. We decided to get officially married at a courthouse while announcing our engagement and then having a wedding a few years later. Official documents and wedding ceremonies are separated in my husband's country anyways. No one knew of our plan. We were, and are still, stupidly in love and thrilled to have such a crazy secret between us two. In hindsight, it was stupid, and no one would have judged us, especially considering we are still happily together years later. But we still decided to hide it because we were stupid kids. So we flew to visit my parents in my home country and announce our engagement, and my dad picked us up from the airport. We were chatting in the car, when he tells us that my Nana was freaking out while he visited her the other day. The day we decided to elope. Why was she freaking out? She announced to my whole family that she saw in her dreams that I had eloped and was now married. They dismissed her because they didn't expect that at all. But she kept insisting and was incredibly lucid about it. She raised her voice, which she hadn't done since before the stroke. My dad had mentioned it because he thought it was sweet that she was so worried about this and became so lucid. My husband and I just got silent in the car, and I went cold. We don't know how she knew that or if it was just a coincidence. But she knew somehow. We went to visit her a few days later, and she didn't remember it at all. She was thrilled we were engaged. We are happily married now and had our wedding and stuff, and no one ever found out we had eloped before the wedding day, except my Nana, apparently. My mom always had dreams of things happening and would warn us sometimes about certain people. But one thing that isn't some weird freaky future dream was her always having dreams about someone on a horse, and when she met my dad, she finally saw the guy's face, and it was Dad. I had dreams similar where I was following a guy around. We were always running around town smiling and laughing and having a good time, and I dated before, but when I started dating my current boyfriend suddenly, I saw dream guy's face, and it was my boyfriend's face. So now, I think I'm with the guy of my dreams, which is sweet. My mom also had other dreams. She picked us, she chose my brother and then me, and she had us, and we looked like her dream kids she picked. Then she had a dream where she got a call saying she would have a daughter, and she said no, and then she had a miscarriage. That one was sad. She had a dream that my brother was going to be poisoned by food by a friend, and the same night I had a dream my brother was choking after eating or drinking something. 2 dreams were too much. My brother stopped hanging out with that kid, and that kid did have some issues. Later, we were thankful for our dreams. I had a dream my grandpa came to me. He was standing, he lost his legs, and he helped me up, and we danced together. He was so happy and free. I woke up to the news he died that night. Dreams are weird. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response, I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up, and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later, I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently, the previous owners had a kid, died of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. At the time, I was around 14, I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 a.m. because I had some work to get done. So that morning, I was woken up, and I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on, 3:30 a.m., and I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad, and it was gone. I was about 11, and I saw my dad standing in my doorway staring at me at like 4 a.m. I was so confused because he almost looked mad. So, I called out to him. No response. I blinked, and he was closer. I blinked again, he was at the foot of my bed. I pulled my covers over my head and started screaming. Also, I don't know why, but doppelganger dad had boxers, with flamingos on them. And when my parents came running to my room, he had on his Flintstone pajama pants. I asked, and apparently, he does not, in fact, own flamingo boxers. Back when I was a kid, my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is, and we don't either. About a week later, police found her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic, who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had a search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to the police timeline, but they swore it was her. I went to use the bathroom at work, and when I entered, there was no one in there. The bathroom has 4 urinals and 4 stalls, 1 handicap, and I did not see any feet in any of the stalls. I took up my normal spot inside one stall and was doing my business, when I heard the sound of someone peeing into one of the urinals, but no one had entered the bathroom. The door is heavy and loud when it closes, so I would have heard someone entering. After a normal amount of time, the peeing stopped, and I heard a few footsteps. But the door never opened. When I finished up, I did a cursory look, and there was no one in the bathroom.